The beginning of a journey. The small town of Willow Creek was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone. Gossip traveled faster than the wind, and newcomers were scrutinized with the kind of curiosity reserved for rare artifacts. For Damon Harris, a retired history teacher, this was both a blessing and a curse. He had spent his life navigating the delicate balance of community and individuality, but nothing could have prepared him for the day he decided to adopt 7 brothers. The sun rose on Damon's modest farmhouse, casting a golden glow on the weathered wooden panels that had stood the test of time. The orchard behind the house stretched out like an emerald carpet, dotted with apple trees that whispered in the morning breeze. Damon stood on his porch, a steaming cup of coffee warming his hands, his gaze fixed on the horizon. Today was no ordinary day. It was the start of something extraordinary. For months, Damon had wrestled with the idea of fostering children. Retirement had brought with it a deafening silence, one that no amount of gardening, reading, or woodworking could fill. The flyer from Hope Haven Children's Shelter had been the catalyst. "Open your heart, open your home," it read, with a picture of smiling children beneath it. Damon hadn't known then how deeply those words would resonate. He visited Hope Haven hesitantly, his mind filled with questions and doubts. The shelter director, Mrs. Eliza Carter, greeted him with a warm smile that seemed to melt some of his apprehension. The shelter was a bright, bustling place, walls adorned with children's drawings and the sounds of laughter echoing down the halls. Damon met the 7 brothers that day: Malcolm, James, Isaiah, Elijah, Gabriel, Jordan, and little Daniel. Each of them had a story, a history shaped by struggle and loss. Malcolm, the oldest at 15, was the protector, his serious eyes watching over his siblings like a hawk. James, 13, had an artistic soul, sketching endlessly on a worn pad of paper. Isaiah, Elijah, and Gabriel were the energetic trio, constantly joking and bouncing between activities. Jordan, the organizer, seemed to take pride in keeping his brother's small world in order. And Daniel, just 6, clung to a tattered stuffed bear, his wide eyes full of cautious hope. "They've been through so much," Mrs. Carter explained, her voice tinged with sadness. "Keeping them together has been a challenge. Most foster families can only take 1 or 2 children, but these boys, they're inseparable." Damon watched as Malcolm guided Daniel through a game of cards, his hand steady and his words patient. It was a small moment, but it spoke volumes. Damon saw not just a group of children, but a family, a bond that had weathered storms most couldn't imagine. The decision crystallized in that moment. "I'll take them," Damon said, his voice firm despite the lump in his throat. Mrs. Carter's eyes widened in surprise, but a smile quickly followed. Over the next few weeks, Damon's farmhouse transformed. He converted the guest rooms into bunk-filled bedrooms, stocked the pantry with enough food to feed a small army, and prepared himself for the chaos that was sure to come. Friends and neighbors were quick to offer opinions. Some were supportive, others skeptical. "You're biting off more than you can chew," Damon warned Frank, the town barber. 7 boys. That's not retirement. That's a circus. But Damon was undeterred. He saw in those boys a chance to reignite his purpose, to channel his years of guiding students into something even more profound. When the day finally came to bring the boys home, the farmhouse was buzzing with anticipation. The white van from Hope Haven pulled up the gravel driveway, and the brothers stepped out one by one. Malcolm carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone far older than his years. James held Daniel's hand, gently reassuring him as they approached the house. The younger boys followed, their eyes darting around in curiosity and nervousness. "Welcome home," Damon said, his voice warm as he opened the door. The boys hesitated for a moment, taking in the unfamiliar surroundings. Then, as if some invisible barrier had broken, they surged forward. The house filled with the sounds of laughter, footsteps, and exclamations of discovery. The transition wasn't seamless. There were arguments over chores, adjustments to new routines, and moments when the weight of their past surfaced in unexpected ways. Malcolm often stayed up late, pacing the halls as if the responsibility of his brother's futures rested solely on his shoulders. James would retreat to his room to draw, his sketches often reflecting the turmoil he couldn't put into words. Elijah and Gabriel tested boundaries, their boundless energy sometimes leading to broken dishes and scraped knees. Through it all, Damon remained patient. He became a steady presence, a quiet anchor in their stormy seas. He taught Malcolm that it was okay to lean on someone else, encouraged James to share his art, and found ways to channel Elijah and Gabriel's energy into sports and outdoor activities. He learned to cook meals large enough to feed a group, to mediate squabbles with fairness, and to listen, truly listen, to what each boy needed. One evening, as the family sat around the dinner table, Malcolm looked up from his plate and said, "Thanks for giving us a chance." It was a simple statement, but the weight of it wasn't lost on Damon. He smiled, his eyes misting over, and replied, "Thank you for letting me be part of your lives." Little did they know, the challenges they faced were only the beginning. As news of Damon's unconventional family spread through Willow Creek, whispers turned into gossip, and skepticism turned into outright hostility. But for Damon and his boys, the bonds they were building would prove unbreakable, a foundation strong enough to weather any storm. And as the first chapter of their new life unfolded, it became clear that this journey would be one of resilience, love, and transformation for them all. Challenges in a small town. The weeks following the boys' arrival were filled with a chaotic blend of joy, adjustment, and unforeseen challenges. Damon quickly discovered that raising 7 boys wasn't just about providing a roof over their heads and food on the table. It was about understanding the emotional scars they carried and helping them heal. But while Damon was busy building a home, the town of Willow Creek had its own opinions about the Harris family. The first signs of resistance came in subtle ways. At the local grocery store, Damon noticed the lingering stares. Shoppers whispered to one another as they passed him in the aisles. At first, he brushed it off. It was a small town after all. People talked. But as the days passed, the whispers became louder, the stares more pointed. One morning, Damon and the boys attended church, a weekly tradition Damon hoped would provide the boys with a sense of community. The sanctuary, usually warm and inviting, felt different that day. As they entered, heads turned, and a hush fell over the congregation. Damon held his head high, ushering the boys to an empty pew near the back. During the service, little Daniel, curious and fidgety, accidentally dropped a hymn book. The loud thud echoed through the quiet room, and Damon felt the weight of every pair of eyes on them. "It's okay, buddy," Damon whispered, helping Daniel pick up the book. But the moment hung heavy in the air, a stark reminder that they were under scrutiny. After the service, Mrs. Wilkins, a longtime member of the congregation, approached Damon. "I hear you've taken in quite a brood," she said, her tone dripping with polite skepticism. "It's commendable, but raising 7 boys is no small task. Are you sure you're up for it?" Damon forced a smile. "I'm doing my best, Mrs. Wilkins. They're great kids. They just need a little love and stability." Mrs. Wilkins nodded, her expression neutral, but her words lingered with Damon long after she walked away. Back at the farmhouse, the boys were settling into a routine. Mornings were a flurry of activity. Malcolm helped prepare breakfast, James worked on his art, and Elijah and Gabriel often raced each other around the yard. Jordan, ever the organizer, created a chore chart that ensured everyone contributed to the household. Even little Daniel found ways to help, though his help often required extra cleanup. But the challenges weren't just external. Each boy carried their own baggage, and some days were harder than others. Malcolm, despite his composed demeanor, struggled to trust that Damon wouldn't abandon them. He often took on the role of disciplinarian, feeling the need to shield his younger brothers from disappointment. One evening, Damon found Malcolm sitting alone on the porch, staring out at the orchard. "You know," Damon said, easing into the chair beside him, "you don't have to do it all on your own." Malcolm didn't look at him. "It's my job to look out for them. Always has been." Damon placed a hand on Malcolm's shoulder. "You're an incredible big brother, Malcolm. But you're not alone anymore. I'm here for all of you, including you." Malcolm didn't respond, but his silence felt less like defiance and more like consideration. Damon knew trust would take time. James, the artist, was another puzzle. He often retreated to his room, sketching for hours on end. Damon encouraged his talent, hanging James's drawings around the house, but the boy's silence worried him. It wasn't until Damon stumbled upon a drawing tucked under James's bed that he began to understand. The sketch depicted a small boy hiding behind a door, tears streaming down his face as shadowy figures loomed in the background. Damon sat with James that evening. "This is powerful," he said, holding the drawing gently. "Do you want to talk about it?" James hesitated, his pencil hovering over a blank page. "It's from before," he said softly. "Sometimes I draw so I don't have to think about it." "You're brave, James," Damon said, his voice steady. "You don't have to face those memories alone. I'm here whenever you're ready to share." As the days turned into weeks, Damon and the boys began to find their rhythm. The farmhouse, once quiet and still, now echoed with laughter, arguments, and the sounds of life. The garden became their sanctuary, a place where they worked together to plant vegetables and flowers. It was in the soil, with their hands dirty and their hearts light, that the boys seemed to let their guards down the most. But the whispers in town didn't stop. Damon overheard snippets of conversation at the diner. "He's in over his head. What's he trying to prove? They'll never fit in here." The boys weren't oblivious to the tension. One afternoon, while they were playing basketball in the driveway, a truck sped by, its occupants shouting something Damon couldn't quite make out. But the boys froze, their laughter replaced by uneasy silence. "What did they say?" Damon asked, his chest tightening. Malcolm shrugged, his expression unreadable. "Doesn't matter." But it did matter. It mattered because Damon could see the cracks forming in their newfound confidence. It mattered because no child should feel unwelcome in their own community. That night, as Damon tucked Daniel into bed, the youngest boy clung to his stuffed bear. "Do they hate us, Mr. Damon?" he asked, his voice small. Damon's heart broke at the question. "No, buddy," he said, brushing Daniel's hair back. "Sometimes people are afraid of what they don't understand. But we're not going anywhere, okay? This is your home." Daniel nodded, but the question lingered in Damon's mind long after he left the room. Despite the challenges, Damon refused to give up. He continued to show up for the boys, for the community, and for himself. He knew that acceptance wouldn't come overnight, but he believed in the power of persistence and love. And as the days passed, small victories began to emerge. Neighbors dropping off hand-me-down clothes, a kind word from a stranger, and most importantly, the bonds within their family growing stronger. What Damon didn't realize was that the real test of their resilience was still to come. The whispers would grow louder, the challenges more daunting, but so too would their determination. Together, they were building something unshakable, something that even the harshest critics couldn't tear down. And in the quiet moments, as he watched his boys laugh and play, Damon knew it was all worth it. A storm of resistance, the small victories Damon had begun to notice, friendly nods from a few neighbors, a tentative invitation to a church picnic, felt fleeting as resistance in the town intensified. What started as whispered skepticism soon morphed into blatant hostility. Damon found himself and the boys at the center of a storm they hadn't anticipated, one fueled by prejudice, ignorance, and a fear of change. Unwelcome messages. It began on a brisk autumn morning when Damon stepped outside to retrieve the mail. His breath froze mid-air as he caught sight of his front yard. Scrawled in red paint across the white picket fence were the words, "Go back where you came from." Damon stood frozen, the words searing into his mind like a brand. Malcolm, who had been up early to prepare for school, stepped onto the porch and stopped dead in his tracks. "What's that supposed to mean?" he asked, his voice a mix of anger and hurt. Damon turned to face him, his jaw tight. "It means someone in this town has a lot to learn." The other boys soon joined them, their faces mirroring a mix of confusion and fear. Daniel clung to Damon's leg, his wide eyes filled with uncertainty. "Are they mad at us, Mr. Damon?" he asked softly. Damon crouched down to meet Daniel's gaze. "Some people are just afraid of what they don't understand," he said gently. "But this doesn't change who we are. It doesn't change what we've built together." Damon spent the rest of the morning scrubbing the hateful message from the fence, his hands moving with a ferocity that mirrored the storm brewing inside him. Malcolm and James insisted on helping, their silence speaking volumes. When the job was done, the fence was clean, but the emotional scars remained. The meeting at Town Hall. Word of the vandalism spread quickly, and while a few neighbors expressed their sympathy, others remained conspicuously silent. The incident became the talk of the town, culminating in a hastily called meeting at the town hall. Damon attended, not because he wanted to, but because he felt he had to. If there was going to be a conversation about his family, he needed to be part of it. The room was packed, the air thick with tension. Councilman Alan Grayson, a staunch traditionalist, stood at the front, his booming voice commanding attention. "This town has always been a place of tradition," he began, his gaze sweeping the room. "We value hard work, community, and preserving what makes Willow Creek special. But lately, it seems like we're being forced to accept things that don't align with our values." Damon clenched his fists, his heart pounding as the councilman's words landed with a thinly veiled accusation. Several heads in the room nodded in agreement, and Damon felt a wave of anger rise within him. Finally, he stood, his voice cutting through the murmurs. "Mr. Grayson, if by things that don't align with our values, you mean my family, then I suggest you say so plainly. Because what I see is a group of boys who have worked hard to find their place in this community. They've done nothing but contribute positively, despite the hostility they faced." The room fell silent, all eyes on Damon. For a moment, he thought he might have gotten through to them. But then Grayson replied, his tone dripping with condescension. "We're simply concerned about whether this is the right fit. For them, and for us." Damon's voice steadied, though his anger simmered beneath the surface. "They belong here as much as anyone else. And if this town is truly about hard work and community, then it's time we start showing it." A growing divide. The meeting marked a turning point. Lines were drawn, and the divide in the town grew deeper. Some rallied around Damon, dropping off casseroles and offering words of encouragement. Others avoided him entirely, their disapproval evident in their tight-lipped smiles and sideways glances. At home, the boys felt the weight of the town's resistance. Malcolm became quieter, spending more time in his room. James's art grew darker, his once bright and hopeful sketches replaced by somber, abstract pieces. Even Elijah and Gabriel, usually full of boundless energy, seemed subdued. Damon did his best to shield them from the worst of it, but he couldn't protect them from everything. One afternoon, Elijah came home with a torn jacket and a scraped knee. When Damon asked what had happened, Elijah shrugged it off. "Just some kids being jerks," he muttered, but Damon could see the hurt in his eyes. Rallying together. Despite the hostility, Damon refused to let his family's spirit be broken. He began organizing family activities that reminded the boys of their strength and resilience. They spent weekends working on the garden, planting rows of vegetables and flowers that symbolized growth and hope. Damon turned the kitchen into a classroom, teaching the boys how to cook and bake. The scent of fresh bread and cookies filled the house, creating an atmosphere of warmth that defied the coldness outside. On one particularly difficult evening, Damon gathered the boys in the living room. "You know," he said, his voice steady but warm, "people will always have their opinions, but what matters is what we think of ourselves. We're a family, and nothing anyone says or does can change that." Malcolm, who had been sitting quietly in the corner, looked up. "But how do we make them see that we're not the enemy?" Damon smiled. By being ourselves. By showing them through our actions that we're here to stay, and that we're stronger than their fear. A community divided. As winter approached, the tensions in Willow Creek showed no signs of easing. The Harris family became a lightning rod for the town's underlying prejudices, but they also became a symbol of resilience. A few brave neighbors began to speak out against the hostility, organizing a support group for the family. Barbara Whitman, a retired teacher and one of Damon's staunchest allies, took it upon herself to counter the negativity. She wrote letters to the local paper, highlighting the boys' accomplishments and Damon's dedication. Her words sparked a small but growing movement of support. Sometimes, Barbara said during one of her visits to the farmhouse, "It takes a little light to drive out the darkness." Damon nodded, his resolve strengthening. "Then we'll keep shining." The Festival of Lights. The turning point came on the night of the town's annual Festival of Lights. Damon and the boys debated whether to attend, knowing they would face both supporters and detractors. But in the end, they decided to go, determined to show the town that they belonged. As they walked through the festival, the boys were met with a mix of reactions. Some people smiled warmly, while others turned away. But Damon focused on the positive, encouraging the boys to enjoy the festivities. Near the end of the night, Malcolm spotted a group of younger children struggling to set up a lantern display. Without hesitation, he stepped in to help, his brothers following suit. The sight of the 7 boys working together, their laughter echoing through the crisp night air, drew a crowd. One by one, people began to join them, lighting lanterns and placing them along the path. By the time the display was complete, the divide in the crowd seemed to have softened. The boys' actions had reminded everyone of what truly mattered: community, kindness, and unity. As the family walked home that night, Damon felt a glimmer of hope. The storm hadn't passed, but they had weathered it together. And in that moment, he knew they were stronger than ever. The breaking point. Winter had settled over Willow Creek, blanketing the small town in a crisp chill. The snow-covered rooftops and frost-lined trees gave the illusion of peace, but beneath the picturesque surface, tensions continued to simmer. Damon Harris and his boys had weathered months of whispers, stares, and outright hostility, yet the resistance from parts of the community seemed relentless. Despite their determination to persevere, the weight of it all began to take its toll. An unexpected incident. One January morning, Damon received a call from the high school principal, Mr. Carter. His voice was grave, carrying the heavy tone of someone delivering unwelcome news. "There was an incident today," Mr. Carter said. "Malcolm got into a fight." Damon's heart sank. Malcolm, the steady, responsible older brother, had always been the one to keep his emotions in check. A fight. It didn't add up. When Damon arrived at the school, he found Malcolm sitting outside the principal's office, his expression a mix of anger and resignation. A faint bruise was forming on his cheek, but his posture was unyielding. He looked up as Damon approached, his eyes clouded with frustration. "What happened?" Damon asked, his voice calm but firm. Malcolm hesitated, then muttered, "They were talking about us. About you. I told them to stop, but they kept going." Mr. Carter stepped out of his office, his face tight with concern. "From what I've gathered, Malcolm was provoked. The other boys made some disparaging remarks about your family." Malcolm reacted. Damon placed a reassuring hand on Malcolm's shoulder. "What's the punishment?" "A week of suspension for all involved," Mr. Carter replied. "But I'll be honest, Mr. Harris, this isn't just about the fight. Some parents have been complaining. They think your boys are a bad influence." Damon's jaw tightened. A bad influence. Malcolm defended his family. "If that's what they mean by a bad influence, then I'd say they need to reassess their values." Mr. Carter sighed. "I don't disagree, but this town." He trailed off, clearly uncomfortable. "Just know that you and your boys have allies here, even if it doesn't always feel that way." Cracks begin to show. Back at the farmhouse, the tension was palpable. Malcolm's suspension had shaken the younger boys, who looked to their eldest brother as a source of stability. James spent more time in his room, retreating into his art. Elijah and Gabriel grew restless, their energy manifesting in arguments and mischief. Even little Daniel, usually so cheerful, seemed quieter, clinging to Damon at every opportunity. Damon knew he had to address the situation. One evening, as snow fell gently outside, he gathered the boys in the living room. The fire crackled softly in the hearth, casting warm light over their somber faces. "We need to talk," Damon began, his voice steady. "I know things have been hard lately. I know it feels like the world is against us, but we can't let other people's hatred define us." Malcolm stared into the fire, his hands clenched into fists. "It's not fair," he said, his voice low. "We've done everything right, and they still treat us like we don't belong." "I know," Damon said, his heart aching at the pain in Malcolm's voice. "But we can't control what other people think. We can only control how we respond. And I promise you, we'll get through this. Together." The boys nodded, their expressions a mix of determination and doubt. They wanted to believe Damon's words, but the scars of the past months ran deep. A new challenge. A week later, another blow landed. The town council announced a new ordinance requiring special permits for large-scale renovations to residential properties. On the surface, it seemed like a minor bureaucratic change. But when Damon applied for a permit to expand the boys' shared bedroom, his request was denied. "This is ridiculous," Damon said, pacing the kitchen as he reviewed the rejection letter. "We're not asking for much, just a little more space so everyone can be comfortable." Barbara Whitman, one of Damon's closest allies, shook her head in frustration. "They're targeting you, Damon. They're trying to make life so difficult that you'll give up and leave." "Well, they don't know me very well," Damon said, his voice firm. "I'm not going anywhere." Barbara smiled faintly. "That's the spirit. But you'll need more than determination to fight this. You'll need the community." Rallying support. Determined to push back, Damon began reaching out to his neighbors, sharing his story and asking for their support. He attended town council meetings, spoke at church gatherings, and wrote letters to the local newspaper. Slowly but surely, a groundswell of support began to build. One snowy Saturday, a group of neighbors showed up at the farmhouse with tools, lumber, and paint. Among them were Barbara, Thomas Graves, and even the skeptical Mrs. Wilkins. Together, they worked to improve the boys' bedroom without the council's approval. The sound of hammers and saws filled the air, a defiant symphony against the town's hostility. The boys watched in awe as their neighbors transformed the space. Malcolm, usually reserved, couldn't hide his smile as he helped install a new set of bunk beds. James painted a mural on one wall, his brushstrokes capturing the warmth and love of their unconventional family. By the end of the day, the room felt like a sanctuary, a place where the boys could truly feel at home. The breaking point. But the resistance didn't stop. A few days later, Damon woke to find a notice nailed to his front door, a cease and desist order from the town council. The renovations were deemed unauthorized, and he was threatened with fines if he didn't revert the changes. The boys watched as Damon read the notice, his face pale but his jaw set. "They can't do this," Gabriel said, his voice shaking. "They can't take our room away." "They can try," Damon replied, his voice calm but resolute. "But they won't succeed. We've come too far to let them win." A call for justice. That night, Damon made a decision. He contacted a local lawyer who had a reputation for taking on tough cases. Together, they crafted a plan to challenge the council's actions. Damon also reached out to the media, determined to shine a light on the town's unfair treatment of his family. When a reporter from a nearby city arrived to interview him, Damon spoke with unflinching honesty. "This isn't just about my family," he said. "It's about standing up to injustice, no matter where it comes from. My boys deserve better, and I won't stop fighting for them." The story gained traction, drawing attention from neighboring towns and even sparking debates on social media. Some in Willow Creek bristled at the spotlight, but others began to reevaluate their views. A flicker of hope. As winter gave way to spring, the tide began to turn. More neighbors stepped forward to support the Harris family, attending council meetings and speaking out against the unfair treatment. The cease and desist order was eventually overturned, and the renovations were allowed to stay. For Damon and his boys, it was a hard-fought victory, but the scars of the battle remained. They had faced the worst of humanity and come out stronger. But they knew the road ahead would still be challenging. On a warm spring evening, as the family gathered around the dinner table, Damon raised his glass of iced tea. "To us," he said, his voice full of pride. "To family, to resilience, and to never giving up." The boys raised their glasses, their faces glowing with hope. They had weathered the storm, and though the journey was far from over, they knew they would face it together, stronger, braver, and more united than ever. The fire within. Spring brought new life to Willow Creek, its streets lined with blooming flowers and trees heavy with fragrant blossoms. But for Damon Harris and his boys, the season of renewal was a double-edged sword. Though they had won a few battles against the town's resistance, the emotional toll was undeniable. They had proven their resilience, but questions lingered. Would they ever truly belong? And how much longer could they endure the quiet hostility that still simmered beneath the surface? A fractured trust. The family had begun to find their rhythm again, but the scars of recent events were visible in subtle ways. Malcolm, once the unshakable rock of the family, seemed more guarded than ever. He rarely smiled, and Damon often found him staring out at the orchard, his face shadowed with worry. One afternoon, as they worked side by side in the garden, Damon decided to address it. "You've been quiet lately," he said, gently turning the soil with a rusted spade. "Want to tell me what's on your mind?" Malcolm shrugged, his movements slow and deliberate as he planted a row of tomato seedlings. "It just feels like, no matter what we do, they'll never accept us. I keep wondering if it's even worth it." Damon set down the spade and turned to face Malcolm. "It's not about them," he said firmly. "It's about us. About who we are and the kind of life we want to build. People might never change, but that doesn't mean we stop trying." Malcolm didn't respond right away, but Damon could see the wheels turning in his mind. It was a small victory, but Damon knew better than to expect instant resolution. A community divided. While some neighbors had rallied behind the Harris family, others remained openly hostile. At the grocery store, Damon overheard whispers. "He's just trying to make a statement. Those boys are trouble waiting to happen." The divide in the community was palpable. Town meetings became battlegrounds, with residents taking sides over seemingly trivial issues. Even the church, once a place of solace, felt less welcoming. Damon noticed how some pews were conspicuously empty when his family attended, the absence of certain families speaking louder than words. Barbara Whitman, ever the optimist, refused to let the negativity go unchecked. She organized a potluck at the church, inviting the Harris family and encouraging other members of the congregation to attend. "Sometimes people just need a reminder of what community really means," she told Damon. The potluck was a mixed success. Some neighbors made genuine efforts to connect, while others avoided the Harris family entirely. But the boys, buoyed by the support of a few friendly faces, found moments of joy amidst the tension. Little Daniel, charmed by Mrs. Jenkins's homemade apple pie, declared it the best pie ever, earning a smile from the older woman. Still, the event underscored the challenges Damon faced. The battle for acceptance was far from over. Rising tensions. The turning point came in late April, when Malcolm and James joined the high school track team. Elijah and Gabriel, inspired by their older brothers, began training for junior track meets as well. The boys poured their energy into practice, their shared determination strengthening their bond. Their success, however, only fueled resentment. At a regional meet, Malcolm placed first in the 400-meter sprint, earning cheers from his family and a smattering of applause from the crowd. But as they celebrated, Damon noticed a group of parents whispering at the edge of the field. Their expressions were unmistakable: disdain, disapproval, and something darker. The whispers turned into outright confrontation when the track coach, Mr. Whitfield, approached Damon after the meet. His tone was cordial, but his words carried an edge. "Some of the parents feel concerned about the team's direction," he said, avoiding Damon's eyes. "They're worried about fairness." Damon's jaw tightened. Fairness. My boys earned their spots on this team through hard work. If that's not fair, I don't know what is. Mr. Whitfield nodded awkwardly, clearly uncomfortable. "I just wanted you to be aware of the situation." The boys overheard the conversation, and their reactions varied. Malcolm's expression hardened, while James looked down at his sneakers, his cheeks flushed with embarrassment. Elijah and Gabriel exchanged worried glances, their earlier excitement dampened. Standing their ground. Back at the farmhouse, the family gathered in the living room. The air was thick with tension, the boys' faces a mix of anger and frustration. "This isn't right," Malcolm said, pacing the room. "We shouldn't have to keep proving ourselves over and over." "I know it's not fair," Damon replied, his voice calm but resolute. "But we can't let their ignorance define us. You boys have accomplished so much, and no one can take that away from you." James, sitting cross-legged on the floor with his sketchpad, looked up. "What if they never change?" he asked quietly. Damon knelt beside him, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Then we keep going. We keep showing them who we are. Not for their sake, but for ours." A spark of hope. The following week, an unexpected opportunity arose. Rosie Garland, a reporter who had written about the family's struggles before, reached out with an idea. "There's a community showcase coming up," she explained. "Art, music, sports, everything your boys excel at. It's a chance to remind the town what you bring to this community." Damon hesitated. "You really think it'll make a difference?" "I do," Rosie said. "Sometimes people need to see the bigger picture, and your family is part of that." The boys embraced the idea with enthusiasm. James began working on a new painting, inspired by the orchard at sunrise. Daniel practiced a piano piece he had been learning, his small fingers dancing across the keys with newfound confidence. Malcolm, Elijah, and Gabriel trained harder than ever, determined to shine in their track events. The showcase. The day of the showcase arrived, and the town square buzzed with activity. Booths lined the streets, displaying everything from handmade crafts to baked goods. The Harris family's contributions were front and center, their booth adorned with James's artwork and photos of the boys' achievements. As the day unfolded, the boys proved themselves in every category. Malcolm won his race with a time that left the crowd in awe. James's painting drew a small crowd, many pausing to admire the vibrant colors and intricate details. Daniel's piano performance brought tears to the eyes of several audience members, his pure, heartfelt playing a testament to his resilience. By the end of the day, the atmosphere had shifted. People who had once been skeptical approached Damon and the boys, their smiles genuine, their words kind. "You've got a remarkable family," one woman said, her tone sincere. "I see that now." A new chapter. That evening, as the family returned home, the boys' spirits were high. The showcase had been a triumph, a reminder of their strength and worth. Damon watched them with pride, his heart full. But he also knew the journey wasn't over. There would still be challenges, still moments of doubt and resistance. Yet for the first time in months, he felt a spark of hope, a belief that, together, they could face whatever came next. And as the stars began to twinkle above the farmhouse, Damon smiled. They were stronger than ever, bound by love, resilience, and the fire within. A community shifts. In the days following the showcase, a quiet but palpable change swept through Willow Creek. While the town wasn't completely united in its acceptance of the Harris family, The event had softened many hearts. Those who had once kept their distance now offered polite greetings or small acts of kindness, a casserole left on the porch, a box of art supplies donated anonymously, or encouraging words exchanged at the grocery store. Even Malcolm, the family's most skeptical member, noticed the difference. "People are smiling at us," he remarked one morning as he helped Damon repair the garden fence. His tone was cautious, as though he didn't trust the change to last. "It's weird." Damon nodded, driving a nail into the wood with steady precision. "Sometimes it takes time for people to see the truth, and sometimes they just need to be shown." The boys, too, began to feel more at ease. James's art teacher, who had once been hesitant about his unconventional family life, asked him to contribute a piece to the school's upcoming gallery night. Elijah and Gabriel, fueled by their showcase success, received invitations to join the local youth soccer team. Even little Daniel, who had struggled to adjust to the unfamiliar town, started coming out of his shell, charming neighbors with his infectious smile and unshakable enthusiasm. An unwelcome reminder. But just as it seemed the family might finally find peace, an unwelcome reminder of the town's lingering prejudices arrived. One evening, as Damon and the boys prepared for dinner, the phone rang. It was Rosie Garland, her voice urgent. "Damon, I hate to bring this up," she began, but someone wrote an anonymous letter to the paper. "They're accusing your boys of taking opportunities away from others." Damon felt his stomach drop. What does the letter say? It's full of baseless claims that the boys only succeed because people feel sorry for them, that they don't belong here. We're not printing it, of course, but the sentiment, it's still out there. Damon clenched his jaw, anger and frustration bubbling beneath the surface. "Thank you for letting me know, Rosie." After he hung up, he took a moment to steady himself before returning to the dining room. The boys were laughing over an inside joke, their voices a soothing balm to Damon's frayed nerves. He debated whether to share the news, but ultimately decided against it. They had worked so hard to overcome the negativity. He didn't want to burden them with more. Turning pain into purpose. That night, as the boys slept, Damon sat on the porch, the cool spring air wrapping around him like a heavy blanket. The anonymous letter gnawed at him. It wasn't just the words. It was the realization that, no matter how much progress they made, there would always be people unwilling to accept them. Barbara Whitman, who had become both a friend and an ally, stopped by unannounced. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked, settling into the rocking chair beside him. "Something like that," Damon replied, his voice tinged with exhaustion. Barbara studied him for a moment. "You've done more for this town than most people will ever realize," she said softly. "And those boys, they'd brought out the best in you. Don't let the small-mindedness of a few overshadow the good." Damon nodded, her words a small comfort. "I just want them to have a chance, to feel like they belong." "They already do," Barbara said. "And anyone who can't see that, well, that's their loss." The conversation sparked an idea. Instead of letting the anonymous letter fester in the shadows, Damon decided to confront it head-on. With Rosie's help, he penned an open letter to the town, which was published in the local paper the following week. In it, Damon wrote about his journey with the boys, the challenges they had faced, and the unwavering bond they had built. He shared stories of their triumphs and their struggles, painting a picture of a family united by love and resilience. The letter ended with a powerful message. "We may not look like a traditional family, but what binds us is stronger than blood. We are part of this community, and we will continue to contribute, grow, and thrive. For those who have supported us, thank you from the bottom of our hearts. And for those who still have doubts, we invite you to get to know us. You might be surprised by what you find." A turning point. The letter sparked a wave of responses. Letters of support flooded Damon's mailbox, some from neighbors, others from people in nearby towns who had heard about the family's story. At the grocery store, an older man Damon barely knew stopped him and said, "I read your letter. It took guts to write that." Your boys are lucky to have you. At the high school, Malcolm noticed a shift in his peers. The boys who had once mocked him now avoided eye contact, while others went out of their way to offer compliments or encouragement. One student even apologized, his voice trembling with sincerity. "I was wrong about you," he admitted. "You're one of the hardest working people I know." For the first time in months, the Harris family felt a sense of acceptance that had eluded them since their arrival. It wasn't universal, and it wasn't perfect, but it was a step forward. Building a legacy. Determined to turn their struggles into something meaningful, Damon began volunteering at Hope Haven, the shelter where he had first met the boys. Together, they organized community events, raising awareness about foster care and adoption. The boys became role models for other children at the shelter, their stories inspiring hope and resilience. The family also started a small project on their property, transforming a neglected corner of the orchard into a community garden. Neighbors were invited to participate, planting fruits, vegetables, and flowers. The project brought people together in ways Damon hadn't anticipated, bridging divides and fostering new friendships. A family unbroken. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Damon gathered the boys in the orchard. The trees, now heavy with blossoms, stood as a testament to the growth and resilience they had cultivated together. "We've been through a lot," Damon began, his voice steady. "But look at what we've built. Look at who we've become." Malcolm, standing tall beside his brothers, nodded. "We've come a long way," he said, a rare smile breaking across his face. James held up a small canvas he had been working on, a painting of the orchard, vibrant and full of life. "This is us," he said simply. As the family stood together, their laughter echoing through the trees, Damon felt a deep sense of gratitude. They had faced adversity, but they had never let it define them. They were a family, unbroken and unstoppable, and no force in the world could take that away. Triumph and new beginnings. Summer arrived in Willow Creek with a burst of warmth and light. The town, once cloaked in tension, began to stir with a cautious optimism. Damon Harris and his 7 boys were no longer just a topic of conversation. They had become a part of the community's fabric. Yet their journey wasn't over. The path to true belonging was still being paved, one step, one act of resilience, at a time. A monumental decision. One Saturday morning, Damon gathered the boys around the dining room table. The air was filled with anticipation as they stared at him, wondering why he called the meeting. Damon held up a flyer with bold letters that read, "Willow Creek Summer Fair, a celebration of community." "This fair is one of the biggest events in town," Damon began, setting the flyer on the table. "It's a chance for us to show everyone who we are, not just as a family, but as part of this community." The boys exchanged uncertain glances. "You really think they want us there?" Malcolm asked, his voice tinged with skepticism. "I think we've already proven we belong," Damon replied. "This is about celebrating that, and showing them what we've got." "What would we do?" James asked, already visualizing the possibilities. Damon smiled. "Whatever makes you shine. Malcolm, maybe you can help organize the debate competition. James, you could showcase your art. And the rest of you, think about what you're passionate about. Let's make this fair unforgettable." Preparing for the fair. The farmhouse became a whirlwind of activity as the family prepared for the event. Each boy poured his heart into his chosen contribution. Malcolm threw himself into planning the debate competition, collaborating with his high school debate coach to create a challenging and exciting event. He spent late nights at the kitchen table, drafting rules and coordinating with participants from neighboring towns. James transformed the barn into his studio, working on a new series of paintings that captured life in Willow Creek. His canvases depicted the orchard bathed in golden light, the garden where they had planted hope, and the family's farmhouse, solid and enduring. Isaiah and Elijah, the athletes, decided to organize a fun run for kids, mapping out a course that wound through the orchard and back to the fairgrounds. They spent days marking the trail with colorful flags and practicing their own pace to lead the runners. Gabriel and Jordan, ever the organizers, took charge of a bake sale to raise funds for the local shelter. They experimented with recipes, filling the kitchen with the scent of cookies, brownies, and homemade pies. Jordan even created a detailed spreadsheet to track their sales. Daniel, the youngest, decided to perform a piano piece at the talent show. Though nervous, he practiced every day, his small fingers gliding over the keys with growing confidence. Damon often found himself humming Daniel's melody as he worked around the house, the notes a reminder of the progress they'd made together. The fair begins. The day of the fair dawned bright and clear, the sky a brilliant shade of blue. The family arrived early to set up their booth, which featured James's artwork, Gabriel and Jordan's baked goods, and information about the fun run and debate competition. As the fairgrounds filled with people, Damon watched his boys navigate the crowd with a mixture of pride and awe. Malcolm stood at the debate tent, his voice commanding as he explained the competition rules. James greeted visitors at the art booth, his face lighting up as people admired his work. Isaiah and Elijah, dressed in matching shirts, guided children to the starting line of the fun run, their energy contagious. Gabriel and Jordan handed out baked goods with cheerful smiles, while Daniel stood near the talent show stage, clutching his sheet music. Damon's heart swelled as he took it all in. This was what he had dreamed of, not just acceptance, but a sense of purpose and pride, a moment of recognition. As the day progressed, the family's contributions drew attention. James's paintings sold quickly, with several townspeople placing orders for custom pieces. The fun run attracted dozens of participants, their laughter ringing out as they raced through the orchard. Malcolm's debate competition was a resounding success, with even skeptics admitting it was the highlight of the fair. But the most poignant moment came during the talent show. When Daniel's name was called, he hesitated, his small hands trembling as he clutched the piano bench. Damon knelt beside him. "You've got this, buddy," he said, his voice steady. "Just play like you do at home." Daniel nodded and took a deep breath before walking onto the stage. The audience fell silent as he began to play, the notes soft and hesitant at first, but growing stronger with each measure. By the time he finished, the crowd erupted in applause. Daniel beamed, his nervousness replaced with pure joy as he took a small bow. Changing perspectives. By the end of the day, the Harris family had made an indelible mark on the fair and on the town. Even those who had been slow to accept them couldn't deny the impact they'd had. People approached Damon and the boys with congratulations, their words carrying a newfound warmth. "You've done something incredible here," said Mr. Whitfield, the track coach who had once expressed concern about the boys. "It's clear now, they're a credit to this town." Barbara Whitman, her eyes shining with pride, pulled Damon aside. "You've turned the tide," she said. "You and those boys. This town is better because of you." Looking ahead, as the family packed up their booth and prepared to head home, Damon felt a deep sense of fulfillment. The fair had been more than a celebration. It had been a turning point. They had faced prejudice, hostility, and doubt, but they had emerged stronger, their bond unbreakable. That evening, as they gathered around the dinner table, Damon raised his glass. "To us," he said, his voice filled with emotion. "To family, resilience, and the future we're building together." The boys raised their glasses, their faces glowing with pride. In that moment, Damon knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, they would face them as they always had, united, determined, and unshakable. And as the sun set over the farmhouse, casting a golden glow across the orchard, Damon allowed himself to hope, not just for their family, but for the town that was beginning to embrace them. Their journey was far from over, but it was clear they had already won the most important battle of all. They had found their place, a community transformed. In the days following the fair, the buzz around the Harris family didn't fade. James's paintings were the talk of the town, and his custom orders kept rolling in. Malcolm's debate competition inspired the school to start a public speaking club, with Malcolm as its inaugural president. Elijah and Gabriel's fun run raised more money than expected, enough to fund the local park's renovation. Even Daniel's piano performance became a cherished memory for those who attended, his name whispered with admiration. The family's success seemed to ripple through Willow Creek, sparking conversations and breaking down barriers. Neighbors who had once kept their distance began to approach the family with genuine kindness. Invitations to barbecues, school events, and community gatherings arrived regularly. Damon saw the town slowly transforming, not just in its acceptance of his family, but in its willingness to grow beyond its old prejudices. A challenge overcome. But one final challenge awaited. Councilman Alan Grayson, one of the Harris family's most vocal detractors, was still holding firm in his opposition. At the next town council meeting, he raised concerns about the Harris family's outsized influence on community resources. Damon attended the meeting, flanked by Barbara Whitman and a few of the boys. When it came time to address the council, Damon stood, his voice steady and clear. "Councilman Grayson," he began, "my family has faced your skepticism from the moment we arrived in Willow Creek. We've been questioned, doubted, and judged, not for what we've done, but for who we are. But let me remind you of what we've contributed. My sons have organized fundraisers, led community events, and shown this town what resilience and hard work look like. They've done more than just live here. They've thrived here." The room erupted into applause, with neighbors standing in support. Councilman Grayson, clearly outnumbered, shifted uncomfortably in his seat but remained silent. When the meeting adjourned, Damon was approached by the mayor, a kind woman with a warm smile. "You've done more than just build a family," she said. "You've reminded us of what this town can be. Thank you." A new tradition. As summer turned to fall, Damon and the boys began planning a new annual tradition, the Harris Family Harvest Festival. Hosted on their farm, the event was designed to bring the community together, with games, food, and performances. Neighbors arrived in droves, filling the farm with laughter and life. Children ran through the orchard. Adults sampled Gabriel and Jordan's baked goods, and families gathered to watch Daniel play a new piano piece he'd been working on. Malcolm, ever the leader, organized a debate showcase, while James painted live portraits for visitors. The festival was a resounding success, cementing the Harris family's place in Willow Creek's heart. Damon watched from the porch as his boys mingled with their neighbors, their faces bright with joy. The farmhouse, once a quiet retreat, had become a hub of community and connection, a family united. One quiet evening after the festival, Damon gathered the boys in the living room. The fire crackled softly in the hearth, casting a warm glow over the room. "I want you all to know how proud I am," Damon began, his voice thick with emotion. "You've faced challenges that would break most people, and you've come through stronger. This family, it's the greatest thing I've ever been a part of." Malcolm, ever the stoic leader, cleared his throat. "We couldn't have done it without you," he said, his voice steady but filled with gratitude. Daniel climbed into Damon's lap, his small arms wrapping around his neck. "We love you, Dad," he said simply. The word hung in the air, filling the room with a profound sense of belonging. Damon's eyes filled with tears as he looked around at his boys, his family. "I love you too," he said, his voice breaking. "More than anything." Moving forward, the years passed, and the Harris family continued to grow and thrive. Malcolm graduated high school as valedictorian and earned a scholarship to a prestigious university. James became a renowned artist, his work displayed in galleries far beyond Willow Creek. Elijah and Gabriel pursued sports scholarships, their energy and determination paying off. Jordan's organizational skills led him to a career in community development, while Isaiah became a chess champion, mentoring younger players. Daniel, the youngest, grew into a talented musician, his performances filling concert halls. Damon, though older and grayer, remained the heart of the family. He continued to volunteer at Hope Haven, and host the annual harvest festival, his farm a symbol of unity and resilience. The final chapter. One crisp autumn morning, Damon sat on the porch, a steaming cup of coffee in hand. The orchard stretched before him, its trees heavy with ripe apples. He heard laughter in the distance, his grandchildren playing among the trees, their voices a melody that filled his heart. Malcolm appeared beside him, a soft smile on his face. "Still the best porch in the world," he said, sitting down. Damon chuckled. "It's seen a lot, hasn't it?" Malcolm nodded. "And it's been home through it all." As the two men sat in comfortable silence, Damon felt a deep sense of peace. They had faced storms, both literal and metaphorical, but they had weathered them together. And now, as the sun rose higher in the sky, casting golden light over the orchard, Damon knew that their story, a story of resilience, love, and unshakable family, would endure for generations to come. They hadn't just built a home, they had built a legacy.